I know, right? I was like, what type of party are we at here?
I like this party.
I have to go to bed at some point tonight.
I never sleep anyway.
I don't want to go to bed.
Hey, welcome to New Wave After Dark. Sorry that I missed last week's podcast. I was taking care of the world one fish tank at a time, kind of ish. Actually, we were doing some other stuff. I wasn't able to make it. I apologize. But today we're going to talk about nutrients.
Yay.
And how to treat them, beat them, what to look for, what to test for, all of the things. And as Ted says, and the stuff.
Trademark.
Where do we want to start? Do we want to start with like nitrates and phosphates and explain them, or do we just want to get into the nitty gritty how they kind of affect things?
I think we should start by a broad category of explanation as to how it translates into your aquarium, and then kind of break it down further from there.
Okay.
Give people the big picture, more or less.
Yeah.
Since you're on it.
All
yeah.
right.
Coral expert. Let's get it.
Well, let's start with the basics there. Pretty much what you're looking at for nutrient, when we talk nutrient level, we're talking mainly your phosphate and your nitrate level. Those ones are going to be very indicative of your coral health and coral life. It definitely plays with fish health and fish life as well, but I would say more transparent to coral care and things of that nature. Really super basic for any type of aquarium care. That goes from freshwater all the way to reefs. You just have to know your levels, really. That's the biggest one. They definitely will hinder your growth. They will make your growth better, and they'll make your colors a lot better if they're in the appropriated range. I've noticed that if they get too light, it turns bad. If it gets too dark, it gets bad too.
It's all about balance.
Yep,
exactly.
And then that's why you look at, you go back even further, you go to the nitrogen cycle. And then you see at that very end of the nitrogen cycle, you have that nitrate, and then how it breaks down, and the bacteria that it breaks down to, and how it then goes back into your system. That is going to the absolute basics, and then creating a balance. So which we'll talk about in our next podcast, is filtration. But going into nitrate and phosphates, what we use at the store for testing, a lot of times I'm just going to talk about testing.
Yeah.
It's the appropriate. So a lot of people come into the store all the time and they're like, oh, I have algae problems, diagnose something. And then give me this magic thing to powder pills, liquid, put in my tank, and it'll go away. And so we have to start at the basics. Like, what are your parameters? And the answer is never good.
Or perfect.
Because then when I ask the
Yep.
second question, what does good mean? And they say within ideal levels. It's kind of like asking about dinner. Like, what's for dinner? Food. What kind of food? Good food.
Yep.
Only the best food.
Only the best food.
And you hear it a lot too.
And you do hear it a lot. So knowing your parameters and just testing. You go to the doctor, you say, my foot hurts. They don't say, oh, here's pills and do what we're going to do. Run some tests. It's just exactly the same way. So then you get your baseline, and then we can solve the problem.
Mm-hmm.
So, because it's totally different solution to solve high nitrates versus high phosphates, or ultra low and one high, to create that balance. So we use Hannah's. They did come out with not so new anymore, but to some people that's new, the high range, super easy, press a button or add some water, press a button, add some powder, press a button, and it's just a reading that spits out at you. Same with the phosphate test kits, but there's tons of them, and the purpose of them is, I guess why we use these is they're easy, and my thought process, and they're reliable. If they're easy enough to use, you'll use them, and then from there, you'll actually have some test results to deal with.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And Hannah's by far the easiest, and it's
Yes.
straightforward digital readout. You know
And
what
they're
the number
accurate.
says. Yep. Exactly.
No leaving it to human error judgment.
And
where
that's
it's like,
because
is
we
this
are
really green or is this yellow? Who knows?
Yeah.
Yeah, and then testing in the dark versus in the daylight versus da-da-da-da-da. Anyway, so coming up with your baseline. So I think the important part of it is to talk about like where, because this is kind of a sticky point, I guess. Where should your nitrates be? Where should your phosphates be?
Now we're getting into debatable
In
topics.
debatable topics, because that is also too.
Somebody's poking
even
the bear.
even within New Wave, we all have. There's an acceptable range, I guess. But everybody I've seen, Tony Vargas does this. He has a really, really good book on all the different aquariums that he's traveled around to see in the world. He's actually come to the store and saw our stuff too. But he talks about he's seen successful tanks throughout.
Yep.
And it can have high everything, low everything. Some have skimmers, some don't. But it goes back to the basics on nutrient levels. And he does talk about phosphate being one of those. Not many people can be successful. I mean, there might be an outlier where maybe you are successful at a 0.3 phosphate, but generally speaking, not a good option.
Yeah.
I think it's gonna depend of the type of tank you have too.
Agreed.
I
Big
mean,
time.
if you're an SPS guy, you're gonna be into some high nitrates or on the higher end and very low phosphates.
Yeah.
But,
Otherwise, you're going to specialize in brown corals.
Right.
yeah, exactly.
Whereas if you're more, TED, LPS, maybe anemones, you obviously going to be feeding a little bit more to your corals. So naturally the nutrients are going to be higher, but those corals tend to like those higher nutrients versus the SPS.
Well, and if you go even from diving, like you see where Fabia's, where like I've been in Indonesia where you dive in, it seems like really dirty water.
Yeah.
But it's like low flow. I mean, exactly what you read about, like where ideally Fabias should be placed in your tank. Low flow, they can tolerate higher
the
nutrient
corner
levels.
of the tank.
In the corner of the tank, yeah. So they
Pretty
can't
much.
sweep and kill things. But
Yeah.
that's another topic.
I guess while we're on the topic of kind of corals and nutrients, and you mentioned browning, I guess Caesar, if you could have some input on this, do you notice anything as far as signs with corals on what they say as far as your nutrient levels in your tank? Like when you see certain things, what does it mean as far as your nutrients?
But I'm gonna talk about only based on my experience with my SPS and my own tank, because I don't have a whole lot of LPS. So in my case, if my nutrients go say below 10 on nitrates, I start to see the light or the color the coral go light in color. And if you keep letting that happen, in my case, they will start RTNing from the base up, and then they just go up in smoke. And same with phosphates. If I have unreadable phosphates, it starts doing the same thing. But if I have, let's say, just reading something on it, 0.03, 0.08, then everything is golden. And so I would say for acros, levels should be phosphates readable, something in there. And for nitrates, I had them as high as 15 and everything is okay.
And by readable, you mean
I mean, like not
like
not 0.12, but let's say as long as you have,
or below.
if you have 0.01, you're okay. If you have zeros, then you're gonna start to see problems.
Right.
As long as you show some sort of a reading on there, then you're gonna be okay.
And then the reason, I mean, I don't know if a lot of people know why they turn brown when you get high levels. I mean, it's not like it's just some magic thing. It's the zooxanthellae that lives within the coral. Brown is the predominant algae. So higher phosphates, that's the one that kind of
Takes over.
it takes over. And so then you lose your color. So a lot of people come in, they're like, my corals are brown. Without knowing a test, just like if I were to go to an auto mechanic and like my car's making a clunk clunk noise, what's wrong with it? It's like, I don't know. I have to run diagnostics on it.
Exactly.
But the test result. But generally speaking, you say, my corals are browning. We likely say that there's higher levels of phosphate or nitrate or all of the above, and start there first. And then decide on what to do from there. Because again, corals, just like anything else, nothing happens fast in a reef tank but death. So trying to bring levels to a safe level and incrementally, instead of just like, okay, now I have high phosphates, I'm going to pour a gallon of GFO in my sump and then drop it to zero. That's not the answer either.
Yeah.
Well, let's use that example of the Nopox.
Yeah. So,
I mean, 30 mils a day is a lot.
yeah.
You should start maybe with 5.
Yeah, so if you are choosing Nopox, if people don't know what that is, it's a Red Sea product. It's carbon dosing. And so a lot of people use it for the Nopox is to no more nitrates, no more phosphates, or to reduce levels. But again, in moderation, just like everything else, you don't start at 30 mils. You just don't. Unless your tank is a 10,000 gallon tank, then you're fine.
Well,
You
it
might
comes
be
down
able
to
to.
patience.
does.
Let's be honest. I mean, people want to see instant gratification, and it's
But they will see instant gratification
If they do it
into
right.
the garbage.
yeah.
Well, there goes his money out the drain.
Yeah, well, that didn't work out.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
now,
or
and
temporarily they'll see things go away, but then down the road they'll see
yes.
things fall out of
And then
balance. So-
generally, it's that 3-week mark. So people
Yep.
often come in. They're like, "Okay, I need to fix this now. We need immediacy. Everything's crazy." And then they're like, "Oh yeah, that worked." And then 3 weeks from now, they're like, "Well, I don't know what happened. Now my water level, my parameters are fine, and now my stuff is dying." So
Yeah.
it's not just because you spiked it now and then dropped it to nothing doesn't mean that you're out of the woods quite yet.
And the bad cycle of that is they see that immediate effect and they associate it with good. And so when negative things happen, maybe 3-4 weeks later, they go back to what worked, which
Yep.
was dosing that higher amount than they should have been.
Yeah,
So,
and it's just everything in moderation. I mean, it's just daily or weekly, getting back into the basics. I guess you have to chop the wood and carry the water. Monitoring it and not just like even this over the weekend, someone called, "Well, I'm having these problems." I asked what their levels were at. They said they're good, obviously,
Yep.
why not? And I asked what good was, and they said ideal, which again. And then I said, well, when's the last time you tested? And they said a month ago. And I'm like, okay, so you don't have any test results. Well, yeah, I do last month. And they were in the ideal ranges, which they had no idea what the ideal ranges were. So we had to start somewhere. And they were getting frustrated. But again, just going back to the basics. Well, I haven't done a water change in 6 months. Okay, now we're getting somewhere here. So it's just, I use it like a new home as an example. Like you build this new home and it seems like it stays cleaner for a lot longer in the very beginning because everything is sterile. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden everything seems really dirty. So, I mean, it's good and good and good until it's not. And then that's when it becomes that balance, So now we know what your levels should be at, and we're all in agreement. Depending on your systems, generally speaking, nitrates 5-ish.
Yeah, I think it's a good point
5.
to start, yeah.
Stay away from the outliers, just like when you're dealing with alkalinity or basically anything. Keep them, plus or minus on that 5 nitrate, and then phosphate. The industry standard is at 0.10 or less. Each system is completely different. Some systems work really well with it higher, some don't. So, those are industry standards, but then keeping that balance.
exactly.
That's where the problem relies.
Yeah. And I think as long as, you're paying attention to your tank, you should be okay. And that's the thing. So once you you're narrowing down that balance and you're kind of sitting within the ideal ranges you want, then you can really hone in on your corals and see the health of them and how they're doing, and very minorly tweak things to get it to where you want it, especially if you're an SPS guy, getting the colors you want. But again, slowly do
it's
things.
patience too, because
small.
people like, well, this coral didn't do well here, so I moved it here, and then 5
do
hours
well
later
there.
I moved it over here. Oh, I'm still not doing well. What's wrong? It's like, well,
It takes months for some of these to settle in.
I know, and some of these you ship them in like we do with our acros. We ship these acros in, and they haven't seen light for several days. You have to do the acclimation period, and then we don't get them in and then put them on the floor for sale. They sit there for weeks, sometimes months.
Different
Same with even our
alkalinity, everything.
Euphilia. You have to watch them and let them just kind of just settle in. When I travel to Indonesia, I need like a day or two to. It takes 3 days to get there. I feel like absolute garbage. If you put me over here, I'm still gonna feel like garbage. If you put me over here, still gonna feel like garbage. Give me some sleep, maybe a little wine, not so much garbage.
That's what people don't know either. Like acros, in my opinion, for example, let's say you have a spike in alkalinity and you see no ill effects
Today,
and you bring it down slowly. Well, how you're supposed to bring it down is slowly, because you're already, otherwise you're going to shock them again. But the reason why you don't see effects is because the change occur in the speed where the acro could handle it. But then after, let's say 2-3 months, you will see that it wasn't exactly that way. And people are going to be like, oh my God, well, I had this 3 months ago and they were okay, but now they're going downhill. Well, yeah, it's because they don't show it right away
Yeah.
after that spike. But I don't know. I don't think people know that because there's sometimes they come in the store and they say, well, I was doing fine for a long time. Then I asked them about the alkalinity, whatever. Well, I had something going on like a month ago. I'm like, there's your answer.
Yeah.
So it's
I think overall everybody just underestimates the time frame of when things happen. Let's say we have a spike that goes down, then we get it back under control within that week. Okay, what's the long term going to do when we have that spike, or we notice that we bottomed out or something like that? What's it really going to do, A, in our coral, and B, with our general health of the aquarium as well? Because there's times where if we have the extreme of we have almost way too much phosphate, what's our fish going to do along with our coral that are already probably browned out, if not dead? What's going to happen with that type of a deal, and how do you safely get it back down?
Well, yeah, and with the phosphates too, I mean, the coral, instead of grabbing, the carbonate or the alkalinity molecules, sometimes they'll grab that phosphate molecule. And so you get weak skeletons, you get a whole bunch of other things. So it's not just browning. I mean, you have wispy corals where they should be nice and dense. That's also generally
And that
one
can
of the
throw
signs.
off if you're dosing. It can throw off how much you're
Exactly.
dosing, which spikes your alk, and then
It's all a mess. And so, I mean, if it gradually increases and you gradually decrease, you generally won't see as much. I mean, you might see some color shifts. I mean, I know at the store, we have some times where we do too many water changes and then the nutrient levels fall. So a lot of people most aquarists, I'll use myself as an example. I see an aquarium and I'm like, oh, something's not right with this. I'm going to do a water change. And there are certain circumstances when that is absolutely not the answer.
Yep.
And I think now in the age of overfiltrating your systems, or having more efficient skimmers, having roller mats, having all these options of mechanical, biological filtration, having big refugiums, all those types of things, doing big mass dump water changes to fix problems sometimes can actually make it worse.
Yeah. And I think you've seen a lot in the past couple of years too, where people are having the issue of keeping nutrients in their system.
I mean, 20 years ago, if you would have said you're going to have to add nitrates, I would have laughed at you.
Yeah.
Because back in the day, I mean, I think my nitrates, I call them Easter egg colors with the droppers, like even using the Red Sea test. I would put like a sample drop in there and instantly it was like magenta. It's like, okay, it might have nitrates. I mean, it was even unreadable. I don't even know. It wasn't even like, it was way above 100. And that's why we only had 3 types of corals back then,
The only ones that could handle it.
Yeah, the only 3 that would
softies.
survive. Some pretty sweet zoas that were brown and some GSP.
mushrooms.
Or as we call it, the Indonesian lawn coral now these days.
Rare Indo.
The
Rare
rare
Indonesian
Indonesian
lawn
lawn
coral.
coral.
And then the long tentacle plates. I mean, that's all basically I had. I mean, we used to do the Berlin system mainly. And so, I mean, that was just a bunch of live rock, kind of a skimmer, and just flow. And then it was just, I mean, that's where that old adage of 1 pound of rock per gallon came from. But I mean, it worked until it didn't, because then you'd have these huge nitrate pockets. So you moved something and you had that sulfur smell.
Whoosh,
Yeah.
into the water.
Yeah, and now you have a bigger problem. So, I mean, nutrients are one of those things that are balanced, I guess, in general. Is that thing that you're just going to have to deal with throughout. There are ways to create that balance, though, and ways to avoid the swings. I think maybe if we touched on some of those things. I know we mentioned a little bit about, knowing and then deciding water change, but there's other types of ways to counterbalance it.
Well, it comes down to what goes in must come out. So
Heavy
what we
intake,
talked about
output.
last week, feeding is very important at controlling your nutrients. And a lot of people ignore it. They just toss whatever in the tank, or they don't have a feeding regimen or schedule. And that, throws off the balance of what your corals can consume, what everything in your tank can consume. So that can definitely throw that balance off. So it's important, also going back to last week's episode, that you stick on that regimen and that you keep regular feedings. If you add a fish, for example, you test and you see what your nutrients are doing in your system.
You can bring it down to even like our health. Like none of us are getting any younger. I mean, when we're younger, you could, in a younger tank, you can get away with, but you have a mature tank and then you start dumping this and that and everything else. Just like, I want to eat donuts, I might as well just glue it onto my leg, because that's where it's going to end up. So, I mean, what goes in has to come out. So I know that if I eat that damn donut, now I have to go ride on the
I think
Peloton
I'd rather eat it.
for an extra. Some of us don't care if we eat the extra donut, but
I don't want to glue it to my leg. I'll eat it.
Yeah, but I mean that's where it's going to end up. So I mean, you overdose your coral food. It doesn't mean because you fed your corals that
They're gonna get bigger.
that they're eating it at
No.
all or consuming it
Yeah.
at all. I mean, use sun corals or filter feeders for an example. You can dump a whole bunch of food. Their mouths aren't even open. That's like feeding someone with a mouth that's glued shut.
That's the other thing that we touched last time on the other episode about coral eating a lot, but then you don't see it. Hours later, they're spitting it out.
Yes.
Yep.
And force feeding is not a good thing either. I don't know if you guys covered that either, but you can actually
Yes.
damage that or it can rot inside.
Yeah.
I wasn't there because I was a slacker and being late. No, I'm just kidding. But I have to actually rewatch that one to see what, I mean, there's a lot of good points in there that I've learned the hard way. Being a Scully collector, my husband being a rare Scully collector, force feeding or dropping a whole bunch of pellets on there, being like, well, look at now they're going to be huge and great. And then you end up with, they just spit them out what they can't eat anyway.
Yeah.
So again, more is not always better. Just like more Nopox doesn't mean better, faster nitrate. It doesn't mean that you're going to get, the balance you want. More GFO. That's the number one thing. And I'm a victim of that, or not victim of that. I am a culprit of that. Like in the very beginning, it's like, you look at this and you're like, oh, maybe half a cup per whatever. And it's just like a little extra. Oh, but my reactor's this big. I'm going to just fill it to the top. And then, you'll know if you've overdosed it for a lot of reasons, but like your anemones will instantly turn white. Your euphyllias will
Instantly turn white.
And I mean, if you want to get into the science behind that, elevated levels of phosphate actually can bend light. So you strip that out. It's like throwing you into the sunshine on the equator. Those xanthellae gets burned and they're like fail. And that's where you get that, all the bleaching. So, I mean, that's another, more does not always equal better unless it's donuts.
Then it always equals better.
And apparently then it's just, I need a little bit of glue and a Peloton.
Yeah. And I think that can be said virtually for everything. We could just sum it up in this entire episode, not have one again. Less is not always more and patience is key. That's
I would even
two
say that
major
goes
things.
for like your alkalinity and all of that too. Is where
Everything.
if you have a spike and you're like, oh man, I need to get it back up. What do I do? And you dump, let's give an example of 10 mils into it and the tank is a tiny tank. Well, for the most part, that's going to be pretty detrimental to
That's
the
the
cell.
other thing with GFO, your alkalinity.
Well, it can
It will.
affect your,
Yeah,
it will
absolutely.
affect your
Yeah.
alkalinity. So then people think, oh, look, I mean, the natural thing
growth.
is my corals are growing.
The growth.
They consume so much.
happening.
So then they increase that even more. And then next week if they test or next week, whatever, Trident, if you have a Trident, obviously you can, counterbalance that. But then you test and you're like, whoa, my alkalinity is like a 14. And then it becomes the
Kissing my
wah, again.
Swing and a miss.
Yeah. Your corals aren't growing.
Nope.
That's not what happened.
Absolutely.
So I think that, I mean, those are all really good points. And I think you have to learn that over time or, I mean, learn from people on what the mistakes they made. Don't just, it doesn't have to be a trial and error science project. I mean, these are animals and it all goes back to science.
Yeah.
I think the biggest problem too is being lazy to test.
Well, it's not that
I
fun.
mean-
I mean, I get it. But,
I know, but it doesn't get any easier.
no, you're right.
mean,
And so I mean, yeah. So for us, I mean, I know in the very beginning it was like, oh, this scary little. How does this thing work? And it really, if you look at the instructions, I mean, it's so much easier to do this than, I don't know, like drive. You know what I mean, or anything else that we do. And this one takes 7 minutes for this particular one, but I use this and I actually use the timer on this one. For when I'm doing this one. So generally speaking, after that 7 minutes, I have both results, plus I have the ELK test.
And it's fun. You can try to play the game where they get down to 0 at the exact same time.
Yeah.
That's always fun too.
And then,
really had it.
but it also becomes that you get that anxiety, or I do sometimes, you get that anxiety like, oh, what are my levels going to be? I've tried to do live, but I'm like, well, what if my levels are really high? I don't want people to see that
Yeah.
live. Like, what is
that's a risky game you're
it
playing
is
there.
a game. So I'm like, oh no, what is it going to read? What is it going to
Yeah,
read? And
we
then you
should do
feel like
that.
that. Yes. Or a lot of times, the reason why I do like these is a lot of times people, how many times have you done this? Where you like take the test and you're like, that can't be right. I'm going to retest it. And you retest it until you get the result you want. And it's human error. I mean, generally speaking, the first test is the one that was actually
raise this in.
accurate.
Yep.
And then the 5th time you test, you're like, maybe I'll just add a little bit less reagent. Oh, it looks a little less than it was.
Take out a few extra mils there.
Yeah,
Oh,
and
look,
so
it's
that's
perfect.
you're not fooling anybody but yourself.
Yeah.
But that's the beauty of these, though.
I know.
You can't do that anymore.
I know.
They
So I
tend to
mean, it
remove
kicks
it.
out that level. So a lot of times prior to this, using the other, color titration based, you get it to turn that color, and then most people don't do the high range anyway. So they're like, oh, it's a 5 or something. 5.
It's in the range of 5 to
It's in a
64.
5, yeah, exactly. It's it says right there like high range for nitrates. I think it only went up to 10 or something
Yeah.
like that. But then the next jump, like you're saying, is 64. So it's like it could be 10, it could be 100. I don't know, but it's in the ideal range.
It's a color.
Yeah, it's a color. And same with phosphates. It only went up to 0.25, I think, for a lot of the test kits.
Yep.
Which is still really high. But then, I mean, it generally speaking, it jumps to that,
can get
0.25,
higher.
and then you got like a point. I mean, we had it where we've switched over test kits over the years, and then your 0.25 was actually a 0.9.
Yeah.
And it is like Ted talked about. It is really important for fish too, being a fish collector, but also, I mean, fish swim in the same water as the corals grow. I mean, they don't have like a dirty section. It's not like a smoking or swimming section in the ocean.
That'd be
Wait a
nice.
minute. So there's not a corner in the tank that's
Yeah.
like adults only area?
No, when I'm cleaning tanks, I often say that I found the public restroom where, like the sand is really, really dirty, your substrate's really dirty. But no, I mean, they swim in the same water. So even if you have a fish only tank, there's other problems that are associated. I mean, if you look at people that live in really harsh environments, they have their own health problems too. So, I mean, fish in super high levels of everything. I mean, you don't even see visually, but I mean, it does shorten their life expectancy or just their overall ability to grow properly.
Just get sick.
Yeah. And so when people say, oh, I have fish only tank, I don't need a protein skimmer. And that's a whole nother debate. But
It's like go to the bathroom and don't flush it.
Yeah,
You don't
and
need to
then-
flush it. It's in there.
no,
in
I
there.
know.
It's good to go.
Yeah, it's good to
I'll
go.
just run
It's
carbon.
there.
It'll be okay.
Yeah, I'll run carbon. Yeah, there you
That'll
go.
fix it.
That's another thing. Carbon does not. Okay, I'm going to say this and piss a lot of people off. But in my opinion, carbon does not solve high nutrient levels. Adding carbon. Would you guys agree with that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it can break down
Okay.
certain nutrient levels.
Okay, I agree with that one. It definitely helps breaking it down. I don't
Yes,
think it
before
stops the
no,
cycle
no,
completely. I
before
think it helps
becomes-
break it down.
Yeah, before it becomes a bigger issue.
Yeah,
But
in my case, I don't consider carbon being a source of cleaning the water at that level.
Yeah,
when
right.
I use it for water clarity,
Clarity.
and
And
removing
impurity.
odor.
Impurity.
That's
That's
it.
what I.
yeah,
yep.
impurities, yes.
That's it.
So I would
Polishing
agree
your
with
water.
that. So I mean, when people often talk about, well, because if you look at GFO, it is kind of expensive, and then you look at price of, especially now with all prices going up on everything. You look at, a half gallon of carbon versus a half gallon of GFO.
Or
It's
gas.
or gas. Yeah.
Which one do I want to buy today?
I know
Carbon
GFO or
gas?
take my
tank,
kids to school. Sorry guys, I have high nitrates and phosphates.
Yeah.
You guys are gonna have to
You're
wait.
missing school today.
Yeah, if that's the case, then you're gonna have your kids dumping a bunch of stuff in your tank. Oh, it looks like high nitrates again. High phosphates. Can't go to school.
Yeah.
Calling in nitrate for school today.
Just don't mix up the GFO with the gasoline and try to put
there
GFO
you
in
go.
your car.
There you go. But I mean,
Or vice
if you're
versa.
Yeah.
also
Oh, yeah,
using
no.
GFO, like when people use those type of medias, they often say, well, how often do you have to change it? And that there's no answer to that either, in my opinion. I mean,
I would second that.
there's not like a 10 days it'll expire and this is that, or 5 days or 25 days. I mean, everyone wants this is this is this, and you just have to, just like your body, just like anything else, any
have to
other
know.
system in the world, you learn it.
That's also because people are, in my opinion, they're making the mistake of like, okay, I'm gonna add a cup of this, and then they see their level drop to where they want them, but then when they go up, they do the same amount again, but they didn't consider the fact that they fed more than the day before or the day after or whatever. So it's not doing that anymore. So in order to solve that, I think you shouldn't shoot to have a certain number. You should say, okay, I'm gonna do half a cup because that keeps me in this range.
Right.
not exactly where you want it, but in the range.
In range, in range.
Getting
again.
down is different than keeping it level in that
Right.
plateau there. So
And a lot of times too, I mean, using GFO once your system is, you've created that balance, it just becomes as an ad need basis, and a lot of people don't keep it on full time anyway. So again, you keep it full time.
No, no carbon, no GFO, just
Right.
skimmer and
Yeah. So I mean, over time, you the goal is to spend less on chemical media and more on corals at New Wave. Just have to plug that in there.
that becomes the problem because a lot of people like to experiment a lot and they don't leave their reef tank alone.
No.
And that's a big.
And again, then you have no idea what the problem is or where the problem is.
Yeah.
You might have high nitrates, high nutrients, low nutrients, but you've been playing with, I'm going to try Kalkwasser and I'm going to do 2-part and maybe then throw in a calcium reactor or whatever. And then, or people mix and match too. Well, my refugium's not working as fast or as quickly. Biopellets have, in my opinion, have kind of gone away for the most part. But I mean, my refugium, and then I'm running Nopox and I'm running GFO and I'm all these things, and I walk into these systems and I'm just like, this is working with this, but then this is counterbalancing this, and
And
let's
one of the reasons it comes down to is because I don't want to do water changes.
yeah, I know. Too bad. It goes back
It's
to
just like,
carrying
do
the
it.
water and chopping the damn wood.
Yeah.
My husband
know-
says it all the time. I hate it.
yeah, I'm gonna. It's just when you tell them, take a piss, I'll go filtrate that piss, and then you can drink it again.
No, thank you.
You don't drink any new water. Just
Yep.
keep
Just
doing
that.
the same. Yeah.
See what happens to your own
Well,
personal
it's,
system.
yeah, it's band-aids.
Yep.
Then you're just treating your system. You're not actually treating, or you're a symptom, not the solution.
And if water changes, doing the actual physical maintenance of a water change is the issue, there's ways of making that virtually touchless to where
Right.
you can just set it up on an auto water change
yeah,
Right.
or
exactly.
have it ready in case you need to do an emergency one. There's
And we're not
things to
saying
make
that it
easy.
doesn't work.
No.
Because I know people that have done it, but it's
Yep.
just like
But again, you go to the outliers of
Ted raised
people
his
that
hand again.
there's always that one person that, they can have, 2 purple tangs in a smaller, what I mean? And they get along just fine. Would I recommend that as an everyday occurrence? No. Or there's always going to be that one person that it worked for. But again, you just have to we try to stay away from the shiny. You go stay away from like what's trendy, try this. Cause again, it goes back to our first episode where it's like, okay, this year we're focusing on no water changes. Next year it's auto water changes every day. And then the following year it's going to be, who knows?
Zero nitrates.
Zero
and then next
nitrate,
year
and then-
it's 50 nitrates.
Yep.
And then-
that drives me crazy.
I know. And it actually ruins the industry because again, then you see all the other people all the activists that are involved in it, and they're like, okay, these people are playing with these animals' lives, and I mean that's where they get their basis in a lot of their arguments. When it's not, I mean, good aquarists, we're all out there. Just again, have to do your diligence. You have to do it. It is a hobby, but you have to do the work.
Yeah.
Well, you have to take everything with a grain of salt.
Right.
Because there's people out there that will do a podcast and they'll like us or whatever. But if you don't know how to take it, then you're gonna commit that crime of like, well, they said
Yep.
that no nutrients is better, and then you go and do that on your tank, and then it nukes,
Yeah.
and then it's like, well, it's their fault. No,
yeah.
No, I mean, again, it's just like children. You can find, or anything for that matter, you can find someone that's going to give you the answer you're looking for. But is that the right answer for your system, for whatever you're looking for? Not necessarily.
Yeah.
all it takes is.
And that's the problem. There's so many opinions. And I tell everybody that walks through the door, do I know all the answers? Even though I know I do know all the answers. I'm just kidding. Do I know all the answers? I tell them no. Because the minute you say that, I tell them if I were to say I have all the right answers, listen to only what I say, they should run. Because
You'd
every
be the
day.
only person that people would buy from then.
Well, no, because I don't know all the answers, and every person's system is different. I mean, this isn't like
Yeah.
you can add, like you don't add. It's not a recipe. You can't add marshmallows and Rice Krispies and butter and make something delicious every time. It doesn't
Well, you
always. I mean, that works,
And
but not for your aquarium.
no.
Each.
So does that mean
'cause
we're getting Rice Krispies?
I wish. I know. I'm gonna have to tape that to my arm.
Yeah. And I think it's important that we say like, look, we might learn new things in the future, and it's not to say you shouldn't be open to new ideas or even
Right.
consider them, but approach them with a level of skepticism
Well,
that
right,
they
and
might
have that
be.
baseline. I mean,
Yeah.
you go back to the ocean, okay? what are the ocean levels? Because I mean, that's what all we're, and I'm going to go back to this a million times over these next hundreds of podcasts. We're all just keeping a box of water. Everything inside the box of water needs the same water parameters. It doesn't matter. They need to be within ideal and good levels. And we're just
Perfect
establishing what those ideal and good levels look like in our opinion and in success, and then overall industry standards. And then stay away from all the other outliers and shinies unless you want to try, you know, in small doses. I mean, that's up to you guys.
And if you're going to try something like Jen mentioned, try one thing at a time so you know how it's affecting your system.
Because there are new things. I mean, there are new things that come out all the time. I mean, we're not doing the old Berlin method and only having, and a lot of these new corals that you see or new species that are coming out of fish, you know, they have a lot of different requirements that we don't know about. But again, keeping the box of water stable helps for all the other things as well. Those things aren't changing over time.
Yeah.
I mean, the alkalinity, knowing that the top 5, calcium, magnesium, nitrate, and phosphate for a reef tank has been it's been very important throughout. I mean, that's not a kind of like a, that's what I think, and it goes throughout. Would you agree with that?
Hands down. That's not going anywhere. I would
No,
say where
I
some
mean,
of the other fads
Some
might
of the
come
other
and
fads go away. I mean, and there are better ways of doing things now. I mean, roller mats, and I mean,
algae scrubbers. That's
algae
another one.
scrubbers.
Yeah, but
and,
not too long ago we had the zero nitrate, zero phosphate thing.
Yep.
right.
I mean,
Where
that
everybody
wasn't
was
too long
craving
ago.
bottom it out.
Yeah.
Yep. And then I mean, you see how it works till it doesn't, because it creates that imbalance. And then now, I mean, they're saying you can do those ultra low levels, but then you also need to take into account changing alkalinity or magnesium a little bit too.
And even then, the only method that I've seen that works like that is like the aquaforest.
Yep.
But you have to dose every day a million things for
Yep.
that to work.
Yep.
Yep.
And so again, when people say they do Aquaforce light, it's like, oh no.
Yeah.
I know, you know what I mean? It's like doing everything light. It's like, well, I'm on a diet-ish, but it kind of starts tomorrow.
But I really like
Yeah.
a donut.
But I really want this donut today. And, you know, so again, it just goes back to the boring, you know, straight and narrow. Like, you have to do this. You know, we have to test. We all agree that, right?
Yep.
We all need a baseline. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, that people have that idea of like, well, the ocean is really low in nutrients. Yeah, but you don't see the ocean when the lights turn off.
No, you don't. And diving in the morning, like you don't see, okay, so it's low in nutrients because it's efficient. It has a balance. You see when you dive, like when I would dive in the mornings, I almost felt like itchy because all of the plankton, everything that in the water is not very clear. It's not visible because of all the food that comes in during high tide, and then it all goes back out. We don't have that option. I mean, again, we're keeping a box. We're stuck in this box. So we have to, if we're putting a whole bunch of stuff in, we have to come up with a way to get it all out. And that's where, you know, we have made a lot of progress over the last 20 years of different equipment and different things to maintain that control and to keep species that, you know, 20 years ago we would have never ever thought. I mean, acros to me were like this mystery thing. Now acros are, in my opinion, sometimes easier to take care of than torches.
I would
I'm
say
not even going to
that.
get into that.
I had that conversation
will
with that
second
at one point.
So, I mean, there's other issues besides that. And that,
It's okay.
And then we can talk about, well, no, I mean, I guess things that you can control.
I used to think that like there was a point in time when I was like, you know, it's easier to take care of acros than the torches. But then until
then
it's not,
it was easier till
shit
it's not.
happens and
Yeah.
then you're like, maybe
You're like,
not.
dang
I
it.
will say it's not as easy to get the proper colors of an acro as it is, you know,
That's
to take
true.
care of
Yeah.
That's true.
a torch. So.
Unless you're Caesar for some odd reason.
He's just
Even if
gifted.
he's like, I do halides and I get colors. And then he's like, oh, I switched over to leads, but I still get my awesome colors. It's like, whatever.
You know, and I try to keep it stupid simple, to be honest.
And again, we go back to the very beginning, back to the basics.
It's like, oh, now I have this new, what do you call it? Amino acids.
Yep.
It's like, but my colors are okay. What is the purpose? Maybe don't add them because then you get nutrients in your water.
Yep.
It could be
If
adding
it's
more
not
nutrients.
broken, don't
Yep.
fix it.
Yep.
That's very true.
But people like to think that maybe they're gonna glow now if you add the aminos.
Unless they're gonna jump out and give me a back rub, I'm gonna
Yeah.
stick
Yeah.
with what, you know what I mean, which would be so cool.
Quick
Can you
look.
imagine like growing little arms out and just have little scratches?
Yeah.
I would do
Except
that
you're,
every day.
you're at risk then of burning your beard on your lights. So
There you go. Or if you look like, I know for those of you who are actually watching and not listening, you can see my arm.
yeah.
Yeah, that looks pretty bad. That was from Friday. That's what anemones can do, and then you get
I
hammered.
yet have to get stung by something.
Oh my gosh, it seems like those older nems that are established from years and years and years, they have like just hate of
Superpowers.
Yeah,
They do.
superpower, and they're just like
They
came
get
out
ya.
of nowhere and just. And I felt it immediately. It, like it feels
I've
like
been
this
waiting
one
for
feels
this
like
day.
Oh
Yep.
yeah, and then I
Finally, an arm.
Yeah.
yeah, this one looks extra sensitive and scarred. I got this.
Let's attach.
They probably just sense you in the water. They can smell you, and then yep,
Well, because
this one's vulnerable.
Yeah, over time you build up the toxin. You
Yep.
don't actually break it down. So now every time I get stung, I mean, I remember getting stung when I was in the ocean, and they thought they were going to have to airlift me to the
Amputate.
main island. Yeah, and then there's my husband, of course, over there. It's like, I'll pee on you. It's like, no, I don't. No, that's not even a thing. Like he's like, no, I really will.
I got you, babe. Here we go.
Yeah, I got you. And he's already, and they're like, oh, we have vinegar. We're fine. And he's like, oh. Just kidding.
I'm not gonna lie, I would too. Like, huh?
Oh my god, I have like the
be
whole
awesome.
boat is like trying to pee on me. It's like, okay, but seriously, it really was. Yeah,
This is not the vacation I was hoping
no,
for.
exactly. This came to the whole different level, which it always seems to at New Wave. But
Yeah.
Let's deviate from that because we
yeah,
don't want to
we
get.
can- yeah, we'll stop with that. But I think we touched really. I think we did a good job on hitting the main points of nutrients. Are there any other?
Did you
Parts?
guys want to talk about my favorite thing, which is false positives and negatives?
Oh
I
yeah,
would love to because
Yes.
that is a big one
Oh my
where
God, this
I
is-
see it a lot in the store. I'll be honest with
Okay.
that. Somebody comes in and goes, "Hey, I noticed that my nutrients are 0, but I'm growing algae in my tank. Do you have
Tons of
any idea what's going on or what could be the cause of this? Because I lowered my nutrients thinking that would remove my green hair algae. Now it's just growing that much more. What do I do?" That one is one of my favorite questions.
I know
yeah,
what's
'cause-
happening.
And
What's
then
happening?
go ahead.
No,
You jumped
What?
in.
well, in the phosphate area, I think that what it is that the algae is consuming it faster than it can be in the water, so you get a 0 reading.
Yep.
Yeah, and then so people then what they want to do is they want then now because of the ultra low nutrient systems, they're like, oh, I'll just add a bunch of phosphate to my water,
Yep.
and that'll get it, and then all of a sudden you go from I was 0 last week to 0.45, or the opposite way. We just had a customer come in. And I gave him, I call them our rental turbos because he had tons of hair algae and 0 phosphates, and he was dosing Neophos and all these other things. And then he still couldn't get his levels up, but he was growing hair algae like nobody's business. I mean, his clownfish were hosting in his hair algae. And so no, I'm not kidding you. So I gave him
No, I know you're not.
a ridiculous amount of turbo snails, and I said, let them take care of the initial problem, but we need to keep testing because you'll notice that your phosphates will go from a 0, which they were at the beginning of the week, to a 0.29
Yep.
by the weekend.
Wow.
Because the algae was gone because all the turbos annihilated it, and then the algae wasn't consuming it. So then we started getting the levels. Well, thank God he wasn't dosing phosphates,
Yeah.
because then we would have had another problem on top of that compounding problem.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing with dosing phosphates. So once you get rid of the problem, that's why you always start slow no matter what, because that means that the rocks and everything, it's already saturated. Mm-hmm. So whenever the algae is gone, then you have whatever you already put in there. Mm-hmm. Also, the other thing is like if you have nothing in there, no algae, no nothing, and you want to raise your stuff, start slow. Because if you start high, you're going to saturate everything and then you're going to get that spike.
Yep.
So you got to go slow and that way you stay level.
Slow is so boring, as my 12-year-old would say.
Yeah,
Yep.
I know.
So boring.
Pulling my beard hairs out.
Yeah,
here.
well,
Waiting
and-
for
well,
this.
exactly.
You don't have to, they're burnt.
And yeah, but again, you tell them they're so boring, but then it's like, okay, well, then next, in a year from now, when you're spending your entire days, you're like, I am spending hours picking hair algae. Now you can tell me what's more boring.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? To me, I don't like picking hair
I
algae.
hate picking hair algae.
Well, and if you see algae and you have low nutrients, start there. Do the manual, removal process
Removal and
first.
see, exactly.
And
Then
then
what
break the
happens.
cycle.
And maybe you don't have rental snails like we do.
Yeah.
Because, then obviously, because turbos, that's a whole nother topic, but they need
They're
copious
bulldozers.
amounts of of algae to
hares.
survive, or sea hares. They need to survive. They need a ton of algae. And then once it's gone, then they kind of starve out, which then a big dead snail in your tank can cause other problems. So,
Put the phosphates back in.
yeah.
Yep.
But again, so we solved that problem, and he was amazed. He was like, I don't know how I went from 0. And then again, so what he did is he tested again and again and again and again. Well, luckily he didn't get a 0 test. And then he's like, so then what did he come in? My tester's broken. I need a new tester. No, I'm like, no new tester today. We'll start with why this happened. And then that made sense to him. And now we're back into manageable, good, ideal levels. And that he's understanding, and he was happy. And because my thing is, I'd rather see him spend it inside the tank than on the outside fixing all the problems inside the tank.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, because that's why we do this. We're not doing it to buy for a science project, generally speaking, to buy a whole bunch of other equipment to make it all work.
Right.
Yeah.
Apparently, my dog Greg doesn't agree with what I have to say here. So
He doesn't like algae in his tank. So
no,
yeah.
he's barking. We have a new puppy, which is he comes free with any podcast viewer. So no.
Yeah. In-person visits.
Yeah, I tried to give him away last night to the ladies on the street. They're like, oh, he's so cute. I'm like, he's all yours. I just brought him. I'll go grab his food. I'll be right back. And
You
they're
can
just
have
like,
the kennel with it. Just-
yeah, and I'll even give you like some allowance, spending money. And they weren't.
They
They're
weren't
like, oh,
about
but
it.
he's so cute. I'm like, wait till he chews up your shit.
Yeah.
Yeah, no
Till
kidding.
he eats your shoes and everything.
We'll take him in
else.
a year.
Yeah. Wait till he poops on your floor for absolutely no reason. You just brought him outside. Or yesterday he brought half of a raccoon back. I mean,
That's interesting.
Half of a raccoon?
yeah, the bottom half.
Yikes.
Yeah, that was disgusting. And yeah. Anyway, the rest of it came out as he threw up all over it. But
Yeah.
anyway, that's neither here nor
Speaking
there.
of halves, so when you do the manual removal, don't do it half-ass and take the algae out of the system. Otherwise, it's just going to break down back into nutrients into your
Great
system.
point. Yep. Where you want to actually physically remove it out of the system, whether you do the trick of kind of running your siphon tube from the display down to your filter socks, an area like that where you're grabbing all that extra junk and stuff.
That's too much work.
There's
sir.
something there.
Yeah.
Well, I know it's work, but
It's too much work.
hey, we're talking about removing
the other option
phosphates.
too for really, really fast and efficient removal, and it doesn't seem like it, but you get it done. It's like once and done. Take it out if it's possible. Like if you have rocks that are just covered in it, take it out, scrub it off into a bucket, rinse it
It's
in
gonna get a magic
salt water.
potion.
I know it's so much easier to just take pills. I mean, not
Done.
Yeah.
to put pills or liquids.
Dario, beep.
Yeah, it's so much easier to just do it that way, but it's not.
It is, but it isn't. I say if you cut corners, especially when you're doing like an algae cleanup or something like that, I think ultimately it just kind of shows itself one way or the other again, whether that be in your display or in your sump, or something is going to mess up if you cut corners on removing your algae.
I think it's the fact that it's inside a box, and you look at it and you're like, I'll do it later. But then if your dog shits on the floor, you don't say, "Oh, I'll pick it up later."
No, you pick it
that
up
shit
right away.
Are
Yeah.
you sure? Because my kids wait till I get home.
Oh.
I'm shocked
Well,
they
that's a
didn't wait
different
until they
story.
stepped in it. And
Yeah,
they're like,
exactly.
I
Wait till,
might as well.
then you know what's going to happen. I'm going to clean it up right up into their room, and then we'll see
Yep.
if they let it sit there. That's a really good
You know what I mean?
analogy because literally you're not going to sit and
Watch
hop over it. You're
Nope.
going to clean it up
Yeah.
because it's in front of your face. But again, when you're like, oh, it's so much easier. Like especially with the tanks, like that's why having an aquarium in a prominent spot, obviously where you enjoy the tank, but also it forces you to look at it.
Yeah. And other people
And
too. If
other
other
people.
people are going to look at it, you're forced to make it look good.
Yep.
And sometimes other people are your biggest critics than you, because you will just be like, that doesn't bother me that much.
Yeah.
I can handle that corner being covered in algae. And then your buddy comes over and looks at the tank and goes, dude,
You got some algae in there.
Yeah.
what are you
Yeah.
doing?
Why is your glass so dirty
Yep.
and your
Yeah.
back wall's full of algae?
And then
Ugh.
the second they leave, what are you doing? You're busting down, cleaning that
Yep.
whole tank. Like,
Or
damn it,
you do it where
called
you
me
have
out.
someone come over and you do it all like that.
That same day.
That
Yeah,
day.
that
Yep.
same day. and then-
Hours before they
You're
show
like,
up.
why is your tank so cloudy? You know what I mean? Like, and then you realize that
You don't know
that-
what I just went through for you.
Yeah. And then just get it done. Like I panic before the podcast. I'm like, oh, gotta do all this stuff. So now I do it.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be done, and I have to practice what I preach. And it's still so not fun. No, I'm just kidding. I actually enjoy it now. Put on some good tunes and water change away.
Hey, if reef tanks were easy, everyone would be doing it.
True.
Couldn't agree more to that statement.
Yep.
If reef tanks were reefer, everybody would be a reefer,
Yep.
Yeah.
except for Caesar.
But yeah, except for Caesar. He always just wants to just stir the pot. I think
Yeah.
though, I think we have a good basis start for nutrients. I think we'll definitely revisit. You guys can chime in, send us emails or
Yeah.
whatever to
Newwave.com/podcast. If you guys have any
Or
questions for
tell
the
us
next
how wrong
episode.
we are.
Yep.
Yep, that's and we'll just delete
I
those
mean, not
ones.
that I'm gonna read them, but whatever.
Yeah, like my clients, you can always tell me what your thoughts are. It doesn't mean I'm going to hear them or do
just say,
anything
yeah.
about it. But no, I'm just kidding. I think it's an important topic that we'll spend a lot of time talking about.
I think it's one of those that even though we're dedicating a full week to it, it'll kind of touch in every aspect of the reef tank.
Agreed.
Where
Yeah.
no matter what nutrient level is pretty detrimental to the setup, where
No,
you
I-
can have something going wrong and it can be as easy as your nutrients, something going right could be as easy as your nutrients.
Right. And just like our systems, they change.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like their nutrient levels was tolerable. They call it, like the first year reefer, then the 2 to 5 year reefer. And then you have a whole set of different problems when you get like the old tank syndrome or established reefer. So, I mean, there's a whole bunch of different, it's never going to go away.
Yeah.
And don't get discouraged.
Nope.
Like with the nutrient thing, because we all go through that at the beginning.
Yep.
My tank is old now, and I can tell you that I'm glad that I stuck to it with it, because now I don't have to do a lot and it's stable. I don't see that nasty hair algae, and it just comes down to patience and go through with it.
Can I stir the pot for our last
Oh,
little
no.
bit here? So I have a
Oh,
question.
why are you
and
looking
I'm
at me
looking
like that?
directly at Caesar
Yeah,
for this one.
yeah.
So it kind of goes into nutrients here. It's about water changes. And do you touch your sand bed or not?
No.
No.
So that's a consensus. No. Do you touch your sand
They're
bed?
saying no.
They both say
No,
no.
I in mine for my LPS, I
Yep.
do because my husband way overfeeds. And so then I end up with a lot of extra stuff. But
Okay.
there's ways that I do it. So I have, and we can show different tools in a different podcast. But I take this big like turkey baster. I took the end off of it and I just puff it, and then it's kind of like a contraption that I do
Yeah.
to remove the nutrients or remove all the extra stuff I don't want to, but then leave as much as I can.
I can tell you why, but we'll do that another
Yeah,
day.
Yeah.
I'm just curious. I genuinely am curious.
I
on this.
don't
If-
touch it at all.
I leave it unless I see an issue, which hasn't happened
Yeah.
lately. So yeah, I let it be. There's good stuff in there.
And
I
I
just
think-
let it do its thing. So,
Yeah, I think it's something we can definitely touch, but I know that I think the industry standard or the industry go to is if you're going to touch your sand bed, it's 25% at any one
Yeah.
time. Never just
Not all of it
again.
at once.
Go slow.
Yeah, you're
low,
gonna
yep.
stir that pot really bad.
Yeah,
Yep.
so that's why, and we can talk about tank moves and changing sand beds.
We
and
can talk
all.
about that in our next one for filtration.
Oh yeah, because that's the one we're gonna hit. We're gonna talk about filtration because I think that it's so natural to go right into that.
yeah.
But before we do that, I gotta go make sure that my dog shuts up because I don't care what he thinks about nutrients. He needs to be done with it. So you guys can
Sounds
start.
finish
I'll
this
be
one
right
up.
back.
All right.
Oh my
Sounds
god.
good.
Well, thank you guys for tuning in this week, and we'll see you on the next episode of the New Wave After Dark podcast.
Signing out.
I'll start off this week. This is Ted, the Mountain Man Morris, signing off. Thanks for tuning in.
Brendan. No, Brendan. This is Brendan signing off.
Where's Jen? We should have had her do this before
Yeah, she
left.
left.
Do you use your high voice?
Hi, I'm Senor.
Hello. I am Senor, your favorite Mexican. Peace.
One love.
Got it. Cut it, Dario.
Is the audio still on? Okay.